How are
Yeah,
you doing this Friday?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, good to be getting back into the swing of work and glad to be talking to everybody again.
Totally. Do you have any fun plans this weekend?
Nothing too much, just hanging out with some family and friends. So, yeah, nothing too big. How about you?
Classic weekend. Yeah, my aunt's in town actually from California, so gonna take her out and about and just kind of chill.
Nice.
Do the whole New York tourist thing this weekend, which will be fun.
Okay. Yeah, hopefully
Yeah.
not too touristy, but a little bit of
No
tourist.
Times Square. If she wants to go there, she can go by herself. But
Okay.
yeah, touristy around under 14th for sure. Um,
Nice.
Okay, cool. So people are joining. So I will just go ahead. My name is Kenzie. I'm on the marketing team here at dYdX. And today we are joined by Antonio, our CEO and founder. Thank you so much for coming here, Antonio. Do you want to open up with a few words about yourself and then we can hop into some of the questions?
Yeah, so I'm Antonio, the founder and CEO here at dYdX Trading. We are the software developers behind dYdX. Been working here for about 7 years. Before this, have been in the space at Coinbase back in 2015. So a bit of a crypto OG and have seen quite a lot.
Cool. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. If you guys have questions, please send them in the YouTube chat or on Twitter and we'll try to get to them. But we have some great questions today. So we're just going to hop right into it. There's not really a rhyme or reason to the order, but that's how AMAs go. So our first question is, will additional trading functionality like trailing stop loss be added to dYdX?
So definitely we're working on a lot of things to make the trading product better overall. Really how we thought about the release of the first version of the software, which is now the dYdX chain, is to get something like a minimum viable product out there and then iterate on it. And still we have a really high quality for what our products are at dYdX. So I think the product as it exists right now is strong. But there is stuff we need to build. So trailing stops, reduce only, to name a few. Reduce only is one of the things that's on the high priority roadmap right now. I think trailing stops are like a priority 2 or so. So those may come eventually, but for the general points, are we iterating on the product and can you expect improvements to trading? Definitely. And that's something we're working on developing.
Yeah, along those lines, someone was kind of asking about the UI and maybe the design of the site. Is that something that there's an opportunity to improve, or is that maybe like a later down the road kind of issue?
Yeah, and that's something we're going to be working on quite a lot, even in the first and second quarters of this year, is really just trying to bring the product experience, especially for our web-based retail traders, up from a place where it's good to great. So that is pretty inclusive of things like new features. I think we are thinking about updates to the UI as well. For example, could you add a take profit stop loss directly on your position? Or could we make it easier to add that while you're placing a trade? Could we add things like isolated margin, sub accounts? All that stuff is coming in the next quarter or two.
Cool. I guess that does kind of lead into the next question is there a dYdX chain roadmap? And if there is, what's on it?
So there is certainly a roadmap. We've really broken. So we just did a team reorg internally, and I'll talk about that now just to give you guys a sense of the 3 big pillars of what we're working on. So the first thing is the core trading team, and that's pretty self-explanatory, just making the core trading experience on dYdX better. And that's mostly encompasses the stuff I was just talking about. So things like reduce only, things like adding the ability to place a stop loss, take profit on an open position, things like isolated margin, sub accounts, all that sort of stuff is going to be worked on by that team. The next team we have is the OTE team, stands for onboarding and engagement, basically. So for these 2 things, we have a lot coming from working on partnerships with centralized exchanges to potentially enable users to onboard directly onto the dYdX chain from like a Coinbase or potentially an OKX or a Binance eventually. That's something we're really excited about because it'll take the onboarding experience from something that still can be slow by the nature of, especially if you're onboarding from somewhere like Ethereum, you know, send an Ethereum transaction, pay gas, deal with the bridging latency and all this sort of stuff. Whereas if we have integrations directly from centralized exchanges, just one click drop down, withdraw, and boom, with no gas fees, and basically instantly you have your funds on the chain. So that's something we're pretty excited about. And then the final and third pillar of what we're working on for the next 6 months or so is what we're calling the Trade Anything team.
Mhm.
And this really is the next big thing that we're building at dYdX. And it's a broad vision, just being able to trade anything or get towards that goal at least. And I think there's two pillars that we're focusing on here. So the first is just enabling more types of things to be traded, and don't have anything to promise yet. But could this be things like indices, potentially real world assets, potentially other types of things that could be, added to the software? And that I think would be exciting. And we haven't seen any of those things hugely take off for derivatives in crypto yet, but I do think that's where things are going over time. And then the thing I'm most excited about with the Trade Anything team is both a combination of enabling a lot more number of things to be traded. So
Yeah.
could we get to hundreds, potentially thousands of markets being listed on dYdX? That would make the product feel really fundamentally different and give dYdX a huge advantage, or at least a unique product offering compared to a more centralized exchange where even the best ones like a Binance only has a few hundred. So if we can kind of get to a Uniswap level of markets that are listed on dYdX, I think that's a really exciting, fundamentally new product, and that's really what we're shooting for. And the last thing we're still designing this to some extent, but that I'm excited about is permissionless markets. So this basically means, could anybody add a market to the chain that is dYdX, much in the same way that anybody can add a market to a Uniswap? I think once you combine that with these other two things, like there's much more types of markets that you can add, there's much more number of markets that you can add, and then anybody can add them. The combination of those three things I feel is exciting. So that's outside of just iterating on the core product, that's the big bet we're going to be making from a development perspective in the first half of this year.
Cool. Yeah. And on those lines, so, permissionless market sounds really great. You tweeted out the other day that, by the end of the year, dYdX could have 500 markets. So I think everyone's really excited about this concept. But what are the challenges you see with adding so many markets, like liquidity or governance, speed? And how is dYdX thinking about those issues?
So there are quite a lot, and we're basically thinking of taking a more phased approach to it, where right now on the dYdX chain, there exist about 40 markets or so. So the first goal for the entire project is to take that from 40 to around 200 or so in the next 6 months. And we likely won't have permissionless markets during that time. So this is really just utilizing the governance process that exists for the dYdX community members to add more markets themselves. So one of the things that's going to launch soon that I'm excited about is the ability on the software, i.e. the client or website, to directly add a market or at least propose a vote for one right now. So that doesn't take us quite to the level of having full permissionless markets, but it makes it a heck of a lot easier for anybody to come and propose a vote to add a new market. Then the big thing that we do need to solve, and you mentioned it, Kenzie, or one of the parts is liquidity. So we are going to continue to stick to our order book model, and that'll be available for all markets that exist on dYdX. There's nothing confirmed yet, but one of the things we have been thinking more about internally is, could we develop automated market maker strategies for new types of markets? And I think that's a really natural place where AMMs can shine, is in these kind of novel or fringe types of markets. So that's something we're still actively researching, but I'm potentially excited about. And then like ways where a new market is created, perhaps there's an AMM for it right off the bat, and then anybody can also trade in a programmatic way through the order book on top of that, and then those two things can exist in parallel at the same time. So that's something we're still researching. So there's the liquidity problem. Then there's, okay, how do we get Oracle sources for all these different markets? That one's not actually too hard, given that we've developed internally our own Oracle network at dYdX. So basically the validators run the Oracle network right now. So it's not too hard to just add more sources to that for, say, real world assets or indices or something like that. And then kind of the final thing is just developing this mechanism for permissionless markets where anybody can add a market. And we're thinking about that really from a mechanism design perspective, meaning, okay, what are the incentives for that? How do you make sure that you're getting the highest quality markets added through that process? And that's really what we're building internally.
Yeah, I think this actually is leading really great into another question that someone had is what is the plan and the thinking behind adding these more like experimental or risky markets that maybe don't have major centralized exchange listings? Is that something that dYdX is going to take a stance on, or what are the thoughts there?
So I wouldn't personally take a stance on any particular asset being
Right.
added or not added. I really think of our role as just enabling people to use the software however they would most want to. So with that in mind, obviously there is interest to trade a lot of these more fringe markets. And I do feel, from a community member's perspective, it probably makes sense to add them. So one of the things we do have to think about overall for the protocol is the financial safety of these markets.
Yeah.
It's a little bit complicated, but there's this concept of which markets are cross-margined, i.e. the collateral is all in the same place and shared
Mhm.
across markets, versus which markets are isolated margin, meaning the money for that given market is just for that market. So the complication of building a cross-margin system is that if one market has a lot of problems, you could potentially lose money on it. So this is kind of what happens with the YFI incident on
Mhm.
dYdX v3. Then potentially the entire insurance fund can lose money. So you have to be, the point I'm making is you have to be a little bit more careful about the assets that you're adding to this cross-margin system. The thing that we're developing right now is the ability to add markets just in isolated margin. So to have their collateral be totally isolated from the entire rest of the protocol. And this is exciting because it basically means that you can list much more financially risky types of assets. And the people trading those assets, as always, still obviously have to be really aware of what the risk of trading that particular asset is. But from a protocol's perspective, it lets you be a lot more aggressive with listings because, you could list something like dog with hat or whatever, and it could go up 10x in an hour,
Yeah.
and it wouldn't necessarily affect the financial health of the rest of the protocol. So that's something we're developing. That'll probably be ready more in the 2 to 3 month time horizon,
Yeah.
but should enable just a good amount more of experimental assets to be tried.
Yeah. Is there anything that's could be a challenge when developing isolated margins, or is it just a matter of time of like creating it and getting it out the door?
We know how to do it. That one's not super hard. It's basically just some software to isolate the collateral into separate pools. So it's kind of like right now, there's only one collateral pool because
Yeah.
every asset is cross margined, and then just adding the ability to create new ones for new types of markets.
Would the idea be then that every market is an isolated market, or would it be like, the markets that are listed now still stay in this shared market and then there's some outside isolated markets?
Yeah, so it would be the second one where the
Okay.
markets that are cross margin now stay cross margined. And then going forward, you have the option to either list a market into the cross margin pool, which is nice and has benefits because you can share your collateral, especially if you're a market maker across multiple different markets,
Yeah.
or into isolated. And also, if you list one into isolated, then you could upgrade it to cross later.
Cool. Okay. That's really interesting. I'm excited to see that come out. Um, okay. Another question. When V4 mobile? Any plans?
So yeah, this is something we've been developing for a while. The iOS app is nearly done from a development perspective. And then I believe the dYdX Ops now has plans to release the app onto the App Store sometime in the near future. So no firm date yet, but it should be hopefully within the next month or so on iOS. And then also in the background, we've been developing the Android app for a while. That's coming along. It's basically done like internally. It can be used for trading and that sort of thing. Just
Mhm.
needs a good amount of polish. So no firm timeline on that one yet, but I'm hopeful that the Android app can go live sometime towards the end of Q1 or maybe Q2.
Cool. Okay. And then I had a Twitter question. Um, People are asking about Stride liquid staking and whether or not dYdX is ready for that. Maybe you have more insight on what that's talking about that you can.
Yeah, so Stride, which is an external company that develops liquid staking tokens for Cosmos, has been working on developing a liquid staking token for the dYdX chain, which is awesome. I don't have a huge amount to comment about this just because we literally haven't been involved in building this, which is part of the thing that's cool, right?
Yeah.
Like we didn't have to pay attention to this at all, and then an external team can come and develop something that can be really useful for the chain, like liquid staking. So I believe, as far as I know, that's coming along pretty well. I can't comment on when specifically they're aiming to go live with it, but I would imagine that that should be ready for some release of the upcoming release of the chain in the next month or two, or maybe 3, I would guess.
Yeah. What are the benefits of liquid staking?
So the benefits of liquid staking is just that it's a lot simpler, honestly. So you can just stake to the liquid staking pool,
Mhm.
and part of the risk slash downside when you're doing normal staking is that it takes time to unstake.
Mm.
So you have to request to unstake, and then a little while later, you can actually get your tokens back. There's additional complexity because you have to choose which specific validator you're staking to, and all that sort of stuff. So a liquid staking token is just a wrapper on top of what staking normally is, where it'll handle that process for you. So you can deposit to it, you can withdraw from it anytime, i.e. the liquid part, and then it has its own governance process for how it chooses which particular validators to stake to. So you don't have to worry about that quite as much. So it's not objectively better than just being able to stake directly to validators, because normally they'll take some small cuts of the staking rewards or whatever just
Yeah.
to incentivize the project itself. But it is a lot simpler, so it gives additional options for users who do want to stake.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I saw a comment that I feel like isn't fully a question, but that we can definitely address. Somebody said dYdX is not a DEX. So I would love for you to disprove that and tell them why it
Okay.
definitely is.
Yeah, this is like every reply to all of my tweets of all time. Um, but yeah, I mean, it really so clearly dYdX is a decentralized exchange, and probably most people know this, but just to reiterate, the biggest thing that we've developed recently is the dYdX chain, which is the first fully decentralized version of dYdX. dYdX has always been decentralized in the sense that it's been non-custodial and the smart contracts are decentralized, but historically, we have run components of the exchange in a more central way, i.e., the matching engine and order books. That's no longer the case. And it's really us at the company behind dYdX are not operating anything, and we're just developing software. And the way I won't go over how the entire chain works because that's well documented elsewhere. But we basically built our own Cosmos-based blockchain, which is as decentralized as the number of nodes there are. I think there's like 50 or 100 validators or so right now. And really, decentralization, maybe just to take the question in a slightly more interesting way, I think
Yeah.
of as a spectrum. And you
Mhm.
really have to think about it in a lot of different aspects. So there could be decentralization of the base level blockchain. Okay, there's like 50 to 100 validators on dYdX. That's not as many as Ethereum. So, it might lead you to believe that it's less decentralized than some smart contract on Ethereum. And in
Right.
some ways, that's true. I mean, I would argue that that amount of validators combined with a staking token that's quite well distributed does lead to a high amount of decentralization, but you can decide for yourself. The point I'm trying to make here is there's a lot of other aspects as well. It could be
Yeah.
things like how decentralized is the Oracle Reporter network. Well, actually, dYdX's Oracle Reporter network is a heck of a lot more decentralized than basically any other Oracle reporting network because every single one of the validators is also an Oracle reporter. So
Yeah.
it's as decentralized as the chain itself. Whereas, let's just say you could build a smart contract on Ethereum that runs on, tens of thousands, whatever, Ethereum validators. But there's only some multi-sig of a few people that get to update the Oracle prices. Well, now you've basically bounded your decentralization of that
Mhm.
product to just a few people, even though you have tons of validators. So it's things like that, things like, okay, now we have the order book and matching engine being as decentralized as the chain itself, again, because that just runs on each individual node. And that's really how we think about decentralization, is kind of like the minimum of all the decentralizations of the different things you have on the chain. So it's like trading, it's like the network itself, Oracle reporters, and just taking a more holistic approach to it and trying to be as transparent about that as possible.
Yeah, totally. Totally cool. Another question we have is, so I know we kind of talked about this in our last AMA, but obviously the chain is released, it's doing a lot of volume, it's really awesome. People are curious about V3. I think V3 is still pushing a lot of volume. So what are you guys thinking in terms of keeping that open for a while? I know maybe you said that there was no plans to shut it down anytime soon. Is that still kind of the idea, or are you thinking maybe even more long term based off volume?
Yeah, so honestly, I have been pleasantly surprised by how much volume continues to happen on dYdX v3, especially after the launch of the dYdX chain.
Yeah.
And this had already been the case, but honestly, especially given that there are no plans right now to deprecate dYdX v3, and really just want to give users the most possible choice of product to be able to use. And if that ever changes, then we'll let people know, of course, with plenty of time to spare.
Cool. Okay. So we only have two more questions. There is some question in the chat about maybe like onboarding support or customer service kind of help. Is that something that dYdX is considering adding, or is there a place right now where you think is a really great resource to get help if you're kind of newer to the exchange or newer to perp trading?
So yeah, we do have a good amount of documentation around the product, and there does exist help docs that are accessible through the product. So that'd probably be a good place to start. We've been trying to ramp up just with educational content, blog posts, that sort of thing in a big way. So you can always go to dydx.exchange to check some of those things out. On the support side, that's basically owned by the dYdX Foundation at this
Mhm.
point, but yeah, there's support people which can hopefully be quite helpful. So feel free to reach out just directly in the product if you need help there. And I think it is something where really our goal at dYdX trading, my company, the software developers, is to make the product experience as simple and reliable as possible. We're focusing quite a lot on reliability in the next couple months as well, and I've already been pleasantly surprised by how reliable the chain has been. There really hasn't been any major issues, which I think is noteworthy with building such a complicated piece of software.
Yeah.
And then we're just trying to take that from a place where, I don't know what the literal reliability stats are, but it's like 99% reliable to 99.9 and up and up. So traders can really have a reliable trading experience. And obviously that's something that's really important to people. So it's a combination of that and then just making the onboarding options, the trading options more simple as well.
Yeah, I think all that's a great point. And yeah, to Antonio's point about reaching out for specific help, our Discord is open. There's a lot of foundation people in there. There's a lot of just developers and other traders that I'm sure would be willing to help. So if you need help, no dumb questions, definitely hop in there and I'm sure someone will respond. And then our last question is, the chain has been launched for 3 months now. How are you feeling about the progress of dYdX change since launch, and are you happy with it?
I mean, I feel great, honestly. There's been, like I was just saying, the technology works super well. There hasn't been any degradation. We've been able to serve close to like 1,000 order requests per second with no performance hit or anything like that. So, from a technology perspective, I'm thrilled. Also, from a metrics perspective, I'm really excited as well. There's hundreds of millions of dollars, sometimes some days pushing close to $1 billion in trading volume, and to get there in 3 months is quite exciting. The
Yeah.
liquidity is looking good. So I think there still is a lot for us to do, and that's sort of what I was talking about with the things on the roadmap. That's never going to stop, but I think it is worth taking a step back, giving ourselves credit, giving the users credit, the entire community that's working on the dYdX chain at this point, because it really is just bigger than us and our company.
Yeah.
But I think we have a lot to be excited about. And then I think there's a lot of exciting stuff coming in the pipeline this year for dYdX as well.
Yeah, I agree. I think we had, or I think there was a couple days that were above 1 billion, and today the chain's at almost 600 million in volume, which is really exciting. I think definitely surpassing expectations. So I think that's all the questions we have. Antonio, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to talk to the community and give us a little bit more insight on dYdX.
Awesome. Thanks, guys, and thanks for the great questions.
Okay, talk to you in a